The podcast is Going to the Conspiracy, featuring Auckland's Josh Addison and Bucharest's Dr. Matthew R. X. Dentith.
Hello and welcome to the podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name's Josh Addison, sitting here in Auckland in New Zealand. And the other fellow's name is Dr. Matthew R. X. Dentith, sitting at the moment in Bucharest, Romania, but quite recently in Germany in a city whose name I've forgotten. What was it?
Tübingen.
Okay, where is that in Germany?
South Germany.
Okay. Well, we'll be getting into
Sorry, this episode of Mastermind is quite terrible. What's the next question?
What is the speed of a swallow?
12.
I don't know. That'll do. No, we'll get into what you've been up to in Germany shortly. So I guess the usual, hey, what have you been doing, Matthew, business that we often start the episode with is a little bit redundant, since the main body of the episode is going to be, hey, Matthew, what have you been up to?
And sadly, we have no patron news. No one has donated more money to our cause, and thus our domination plan for the entirety of the Earth is currently on hold until such time that more money comes in. At the moment, we can't even afford to launch the Death satellite. It's very disappointing.
I mean, it's not that
Sorry,
no people are donating.
Did I say Death satellite? I meant Satellite of Joy.
Well, it's the same thing, really.
It brings joy to us. It's true.
No, when you say but people, we still have people donating. It's just we haven't had any more people. I assume
Yes, we need to increase our network. We need more people to join our cause. You could join our cause for $1 a week, $1 a month. Every little bit counts when it comes to the extermination of your futile, puerile species.
He's not wrong. Well, that's the shameless shilling out of the way. Shall we just jump straight into the news then?
Yes, let's go straight to the news.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
Righto, so it's been a couple of weeks now, what with your gadding about Europe like a gad fly.
Fly?
Gadfly? Gad about?
Yep, gadfly.
That'll do. So we've got a little bit. We've had a bunch of interesting things happening. So I predict this will be a longer than usual news section, but that's okay. You can just give us a quick rundown of your conference in Germany with whatever time we have left. So let's crack straight into it. I saw an interesting story, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago now, about the Government Accountability Office, which is not something I'd heard of before, but it's a branch of the part of the executive branch, I think, in the States.
I believe so, yes.
Yes, so the first I'd heard of them, but I assume American listeners will have, or not, I don't know. I don't know how secretive they are, but they're whatever they are, they're responsible for basically auditing other government departments and making sure that they're behaving nicely and doing as they ballywell should. And most recently, well, they've been they conducted an operation investigating the Department of Defense, who has this program which many of you have probably heard of, where police stations or police agencies can apply for what I gather is basically sort of military surplus stuff. That's where you hear all these stories of the police tooling around in armoured vehicles with all their flak vests and machine guns and all of that business, which they get under this program. Now, the Government Accountability Office has been auditing this program and making sure that they're only giving this military hardware to people who they should be giving it to.
Yes,
Spoilers,
because police
they're
departments
not.
do need tanks and flak vests.
Well, that's what they would claim. But it turns out that fake, completely imaginary police officers also need this gear and can obtain it. The GAO ran a sting operation, basically. They cooked up some fake police officers from a fake police department and requested this gear from the Defense Department, and they got $1.2 million worth of gear, including, it says, night vision goggles, simulated M16A2 rifles and pipe bomb equipment. Supposedly, the rifles and bomb equipment could have been made functional with widely available parts. So perhaps not a good look for the Defence Department there. I thought this was interesting, though, because I don't know that we've ever really talked about the idea of a sting operation as being a kind of conspiracy theory, and a kind of benevolent conspiracy theory, it would seem. A good example of that sort of thing.
Yes, it's also a good example of why secrecy is not necessarily wrong even within a open and transparent democratic society. Because situations like this require that you keep information from the public, because if the public are aware you're conducting a sting operation, presumably the targets of the sting operation will become aware of it as well. So yes, it's a good example of a benevolent conspiracy, if you accept that such things exist, which I do, but I suppose you might worry about government departments engaging in such kind of activities, and also a good example of why secrecy is not necessarily wrong in a variety of situations. Do we know much about these fake law enforcement agencies that have been requesting this military hardware?
Not a lot. It didn't seem to give much more details than just they set up, they had people posing as fake police officers, as from a fake department, and basically said, "Hello, we're cops. Give us guns, please." And the Defence Department said, "Yeah, okay." Where less than a week, it said it took them. They created a fictitious law enforcement agency complete with a fake website and a bogus address that traced back to an empty lot. And with those credentials, were able to come away with over $1 million worth of stuff. Which, yeah, is a slight worry, I suppose, but I guess that's what the Government Accountability Office is there to show up. So good on them, I guess.
Now you do realise, Josh, given our pre-existing conversation from the beginning of this episode about needing to exterminate all humanity, you probably shouldn't have made this a news item. You should have just sent this to me as a memo, and we could have requested this military hardware for the podcast.
Yes.
We could have got $1.2 million worth of military hardware. We could be recording this podcast in an armoured vehicle wearing flak jackets. Not us wearing flak jackets. The armoured vehicle would be festooned with flak jackets. It gives it extra protection. And also, presumably, really quite good for noise isolation.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew. I did not think of that, but maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Speaking of next time, last time on this very podcast, we talked about the whole Donald Trump.
So
Jr.
can I?
episode.
When you say Donald Trump, can I just? I want to give out the sigh for a change. So just say the word Donald Trump.
Donald Trump Jr. So, nevertheless, there have been further conspiratorial developments around the case that we talked about 2 weeks ago, have there not?
Yes, so at the time that Donald Trump Jr. made his statement that the meeting was actually about adoptions and the Magnitsky Act. I'm actually not quite sure what the pronunciation of that name is.
But yes, adoptions, they claimed, was the subject.
And Trump Sr. claimed that he had no idea what his son was doing at the time and absolutely had no role whatsoever in drafting the statement made by Trump Jr. And then I believe it was either the Washington Post or the Washington Times, I probably should have noted that down, who then had an expose saying that Trump Sr. actually dictated the statement that Trump Jr. gave, which means that Trump Sr. basically wrote it. And then the White House was forced to admit that, yes, it is true that Trump Sr. had a hand in drafting the statement, but only because it was his son. So the argument here was that Trump Sr. was only looking after his son and certainly wasn't doing something considered to be unpresidential. What he was doing was something which is prototypically fatherly.
Yeah, it just kind of... It's just kind of another little thing. It's a sort of a cherry on the top of a dog turd. But
it certainly shows that there's a certain amount of duplicity and deception emanating not just from the White House but from the president. Because the other bit of news which came out in the last few days was that Donald Trump gave that rather interesting speech in front of the Boy Scouts and then claimed he got a phone call from the leader of the Boy Scout Association in America praising him for that speech. And now said leader of the Boy Scout Association in America has said, nope, never made that phone call. That phone call never happened. So it's another case of Trump Sr. claiming something which never actually happened, and people pointing that out in the White House having to go, oh yeah, that was just Trump doing Trump. He's just being Trumpy. Not being non-presidential, he's just being fatherly or a business person. It's never he's doing something which offends the office of the president. It's always, oh no, he's doing something which is what a father would do or a good business leader would do.
Sticking in America, of course, one of the bigger things that happened while you were away was the failure of the whole healthcare repeal, skinny repeal, whatever the hell it was they were trying to do this time. Thanks to John McCain dramatically striding into the office and giving a dramatic thumbs down and taking all the credit, despite the fact that several other senators also voted no and are equally as responsible for the thing failing. But anyway, immediately afterwards, apparently, there was a brief surge in the existence of John McCain cancer truthers. Because what was the deal? He's been diagnosed with brain cancer and he was off being treated and had to be rushed back or something like that. But now there are a bunch of people claiming that no, he doesn't have cancer at all, and that scar that appeared to be from cancer treatment, right, that was just makeup, and it's all a plot by someone. I think they're trying to claim that Republican Senator John McCain is actually in with the Democrats and is some sort of mole, a cancerous mole, you might say.
So he doesn't have cancer, he is cancer.
Something like that. Obviously, no substance to this whatsoever. It just seemed to be a lot of people going, gah, conspiracy. But it was interesting to see, A, how rapidly it popped up, and B, just how plain silly it was.
Yeah, and there are a lot of conspiratorial rumors going around about John McCain and his role in defeating the ACHA. The most interesting story here, which might turn out to be slightly conspiratorial, given how close John McCain seemed to be to the Democrats when it came to planning to vote in the way that he did, was that John McCain only voted for the bill in the first place to go to debate because as it was a reconciliation bill, so it's a budget-related bill as opposed to a new law, reconciliation bills can only be debated once a year. So by allowing the bill to go to debate, it proceeded to the next section, at which point there'd be a vote on the reconciliation. By denying that vote on the reconciliation, the Republicans cannot use that mechanism again for another year, thus effectively defeating the healthcare bill in the House. Now, if McCain actually thought this plan up with the Democrats, that actually would be yet another case of a benevolent conspiracy.
Or not, depending on where your political affiliations are, I suppose.
Well, yes, and actually that gets you into the tricky thing of the so-called benevolent conspiracy, which is, of course, it's very much depends on what people think the ends are. If you're the target of a benevolent conspiracy, then you think it's benevolent. But if the benevolent conspiracy somehow harms your particular part of society, then it doesn't matter how much good it's meant to do, you're going to consider it to be very sinister indeed. This is why, in my book, I kind of discard the notion that we should treat conspiracies as being sinister, because it's actually too hard to map out what we mean by conspiracies being about malevolent or sinister ends. It is very much a matter of perspective, and most conspirators are not mustachioed villains going,
Paul Ryan, for instance, is completely clean-shaven, and yet he's been... What's he done now? He's also been caught on tape doing...
Well, actually, no. So there is a claim that Paul Ryan has been caught on tape admitting that the Republicans in the presidential primaries laundered Russian money. Now, if you search for this claim online, the primary source is I can never pronounce the name of this blog properly. Petribotics, which is the Louise Minsk blog. Now, Louise Minsk has been making all sorts of very, very bizarre claims of conspiracy of recent note. So she's a UK journalist who suddenly has got a thing about Putin trying to meddle in the American elections. She's kind of a darling to certain people on the liberal left because she's pillaring the Republican right, and yet many of the claims she makes, such as the plan to make Orrin Hatch president, don't actually seem to be based much in the way of evidence, but mostly on speculation and troublesome anonymous sources that, when probed, just don't seem to exist.
The very existence of the dodginess of this conspiracy has caused some sort of allergic reaction in me.
Anyway. Just for listeners back home, the reason why I'm having issues pronouncing the name of this blog, it is spelt Patribotics. So it's Petribotics.
So is it meant to be like patriotic, but with a bot?
Yeah.
Is it like patriotic and robotic?
Yeah, Petribotics, No, yes. It's very confusing, and is a good reason as to why there should be laws about blog names.
Okay, so nothing has actually shown up to substantiate these claims so far. Then she's just making the claim that a recording exists, but no one's seen the recording. Is that the state?
At this stage, that is the substance of the claim. So it sounds fantastic, and yet at this stage also sounds widely suspicious because of its source.
Well, we'll have to see if the source shows up or if it never ever does. Now, have you listened to Black Hands, Matthew?
No, and for two reasons. One, I'm kind of over discussion about the Bain family murder case now. And B, I don't actually trust the source, the podcast in this case, Martin Van Bainen? Is that his last name? Van Bainen?
Bainen, he says it.
Given that he has claimed, contrary to the court proceedings, that he is adamant that David Bain committed the crime, I kind of feel the conclusion's already set into the story. But you've been listening to this new podcast, and you'll be able to give us a considered opinion, because unlike me, who's speculating on things which I just suspect about the podcast, you've done a deep dive into Black Hands, all 10 episodes. What do you think?
Well, now for people who may not be aware, the Bain case is a famous and controversial murder case in New Zealand. In 1994, 5 members of the Bain family were killed in their home in the city of Dunedin. Initially, it appeared to have been a murder-suicide by the father, Robin Bain, but fairly quickly suspicion turned to the one surviving family member, the oldest son, David Bain. David Bain was accused of the murders, was found guilty, sentenced to, given a life sentence with a 16-year non-parole period, but a lot of people believed he was innocent. And something like 12 years later, they finally managed to get him a new trial. The Privy Court, or whoever it was, agreed that there had been a miscarriage of justice in the initial case. He was retried. The second trial, he was found not guilty. And then, as I believe we talked about a little while ago, there was a question of whether or not he should be compensated for the 12 or 13 years he spent in jail. And there was a bit of a stink about that, where it seemed as though the government was shopping around for an opinion on the matter that it liked the sound of. Now, we talked about, in episode 44, I noticed this going by our numbering as episode 144, so exactly 100 episodes ago, we did an episode on true crime conspiracies in New Zealand, because this was when Serial and the Jinx were very big and everyone was talking about true crime, and we thought, why not jump onto that bandwagon? And at the time we thought about the Bain case, but then thought, well, there's nothing actually overly conspiratorial about it. It's been very controversial. The evidence... There is no conclusive evidence. That's the problem. There is evidence that it was Robin Bain who did it. There is evidence that it was David Bain who did it. The first
There's
court
evidence
case,
which supports that they both did it. So Robin Bain committed the bulk of the murders, and David Bain then killed his father.
So yeah, it's been the opinion has always been quite strongly divided, and David Bain's defenders, led by Joe Karam, who's a businessman and a former All Black, has been very impassioned in his defence, and many books have been written and so on. But now this journalist Martin van Bynen, who's covered the case, did his 10-episode podcast where he basically just goes through the details of the case and the evidence and so on, and he doesn't. Like, it's not until the end that he states specifically that he believes David Bain is guilty, but it's fairly clear that he does pretty much right from the start in the way he presents things. And when he gets to the end, he says, "It should come as no surprise to you that I think David Bain is guilty." But one thing I learned from listening to this podcast that I didn't know before is that at one point people were actually accusing the police of conspiring to fit David up for it when people made claims that they had planted one crucial piece of evidence. Part of the case involved the fact that two of the family members, the mother and one of the daughters, were found dead in their beds, presumably having been shot either in their sleep or before they could get out of bed. This happened early in the morning. One of the daughters was found out of her bed in a position that indicated she was on her knees or something, potentially, begging for her life or who knows what, but had managed to get out of her bed. Robin Bain was found lying in the living room with the rifle next to him, either indicating that he had killed himself or having been murdered and then staged to look like he killed himself, depending on who you believe. But the youngest son, his bedroom was a complete shambles. It was obvious that he had woken up, had been ready for the killer, whoever it was, when they came for him, and there'd been quite a fight and a struggle in his bedroom before the killer finally managed to subdue him and finish him off. Now, one thing that in the initial investigation, the police found a pair of glasses that appeared to belong to David, which were missing the right lens. And sometime later, they found the right lens to these glasses in among the wreckage of the younger brother's bedroom, which looked quite damning. That appeared to be fairly strong evidence that this had been knocked out while David was struggling with his brother in a fight to the death, basically. And yes, apparently, some of David Bain's defenders, at least, claimed that this evidence had been planted, that the lens had been put there by police, and there was a little bit of fishiness around the fact that crime scene photos at first didn't appear to show the lens there, and then did, although that was explained that it was simply because certain things had shifted as the room was in a complete shambles, and that as police officers and other people had looked around in the room, things had shifted, and so that's why the lens could be seen in one place or not another.
Although there was also the claim that when they did the first few walkthroughs, no one spotted the lens, and then it turned up, I think, on the third walkthrough, which other people found to be very, very suspicious.
Although again, it was claimed that it was found within the wreckage, so I don't think it was just sitting out in the open. But at any rate, and people were willing to entertain this, and there's a bit in the podcast where Martin van Bynen sort of expresses some surprise that people would have such a low opinion of the police in this country. Although I immediately thought, well, that just goes to show, if you can remember back 100 episodes, and you're remembering, then one of the cases we did talk about was the case of Arthur Allen Thomas, where it was shown that police planted evidence against him. And I think that just still seems to resonate today, even though it happened before I was born. It was either the late 60s or early 70s, I can't remember the exact date, but so something from that long ago, people still sort of remember it, which is possibly there's some lesson there in the effects of police corruption or something being more widespread than we thought.
Well, yes, and also if you have any family members who have had any interaction with the police, not from the perspective of having been arrested, but having worked with the police, you'll have been regaled with stories of the police routinely in the 70s at the very latest, routinely planting evidence to secure convictions. There was a point in time in police culture where we've got the person responsible, now we have to ensure that they get convicted. And many people still remember that that culture did exist, and the suspicion that elements of that culture have never actually disappeared. I mean, it doesn't help that in the David Bain case, the police effectively allowed the house to be burnt down. So all of the potential evidence that could be examined after the fact, of course, just disappeared.
And yes, I mean, Van Bynen he's quite, in places he is quite critical of the police, and indeed I believe that's one of the reasons why David Bain was able to get a retrial, was because they believe the police had bungled the case against him to an extent. And so there are various points where in the podcast where he'll point out that, if the police had done this, then we might have got real evidence that would have shown things either way, but they didn't do this and they missed that and they should have done this. So he is critical of the police in places. One interesting thing though, that stuck out to me the entire time is that he has the sort of accent where he pronounces the word police as a single syllable. It's police the entire way through, which got on my nerves just a little bit, but maybe that's just me. But yeah, when it comes to the conclusion, it was quite interesting just in terms of evidence, and we've talked about this in the past. We had an entire episode devoted to evidence and the sorts of evidence that people appeal to when they're talking about conspiracy theories or other theories in general. So I mean, the main thing about it is that in the case, all of the evidence is circumstantial. There is no one piece of evidence that conclusively proves things either way, or we wouldn't be here now 20, 30 years later. His opinion, in the end, he basically sets it all out. His opinion is basically that there's too much for the defence to explain. He says there's all this evidence against David. It is circumstantial evidence. Each single piece of evidence can be explained, but as a whole, there's just so much that needs to be explained that he believes the only reasonable conclusion is that David Bain was guilty, and when there didn't appear to be as many things that needed explaining away in the competing theory that it was that Robin Bain was the murderer.
Now, I've heard some criticism of Black Hands that he doesn't spend all that much time on the allegations of Robin Bain and the incestful relationships with his daughter.
Yes, well, it's mentioned. So that was one of the defence's key things, was the claim that Robin Bain was involved in an incestuous relationship with one of his daughters, and she was about to go public with this. And if that were true, that would give quite a strong motive, perhaps, for Robin to be the killer. He mentions it. I believe there was the person who made these claims initially didn't show up to the court case when I don't have this in my notes, so I'm just going off memory now, but this was the guy who was he didn't show up when he was called to the case. Initially he claimed he thought that the police had said he didn't need to come to the trial or something, and then when he did testify he was regarded as being what's the word, not untrustworthy, but his evidence, the judge basically ruled that his evidence was inadmissible because it was essentially hearsay and not worthwhile. So the claims were there. That was in the first court case. I don't recall whether or not the allegations came into the retrial at all. So he does address it, but not in great depth, I suppose.
Interesting.
But yeah, so I mean, if you've never heard of the Bain family murders, it's a fascinating case. It's 1994, so that's what, 33 years ago.
Yep, 33 years ago, a third of a century ago.
A third of a century. My rudimentary mathematics failed me there all of a sudden for some reason. And the country's still talking about it.
Back when we were young and vibrant.
Actually, I was a little bit surprised. I remembered it. I remembered myself being younger. I thought that was something that happened when I was at school, but 1994 I was already at university. So my memory let me down a little bit there right from the start. But yeah, so essentially, I don't know, the only moral we can come down with, can draw from it perhaps, is that only one person knows for sure what happened, and that's David Bain. He says he's innocent, but then he would say that. So it just comes down to evidence and what you make of a large body of purely circumstantial evidence, I guess.
Actually, I should point out there's even a possibility that even David Bain doesn't know what occurred. So some
Yes.
psychologists have talked about the fugue state he appeared to be in after he called the police. And people have speculated it is quite possible that actions were committed that were actually never then committed to memory, i.e. he may legitimately not know what happened at that particular point in time.
Van Bynen does actually, he does cast some aspersions on those claims. He talks about the fact that the police officer and a paramedic who observed him having this supposed seizure both claimed that, having had experience with people having seizures in the past, he looked like he might have been faking it, which is all a little bit sort of people's opinions, really. There's nothing conclusive there, but Van Bynen does jump on that to suggest that perhaps he was setting up his defence right from the start. But I mean,
and also, but if you
as
also
with
think
everything
the
else,
police
it could go
have,
both ways.
if you think the police have conspired, then of course it's quite convenient for the police to go, oh no, that fugue state not legitimate.
Although the paramedic did go into greater detail around the testing, the test that one can do on a person who appears to be unconscious, and he did not pass the tests or something. There was something to do with the reactions of the eyes you'd expect that he didn't give or something. But anyway, this is the sort of thing that you can just go on and on and on and on and on, and looking at all the different details. But the sad fact is that not one of these details is actually going to prove it either way. And it was interesting that people people still look for the elusive smoking gun, although, as we've talked about in the past, a smoking gun itself is circumstantial evidence, technically speaking. But people have sort of been trying to find this one bit of evidence. They mentioned the supposed scoring on Robin Bain's thumb, if you remember that.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Supposedly, people noticed in some photos of Robin Bain's body, or autopsy photos, I can't remember, that he had these parallel marks on his thumb, which people claimed were the marks that you'd get from loading bullets into a rifle's magazine, which they then, were claiming was proof positive that, look, Robin's the one who loaded the gun. It was David's gun, but Robin loaded it, therefore he must have been the killer. But again, it was like, well, they look like those sorts of marks, but not exactly like them, and there was plenty of evidence that he'd been doing a bunch of heavy work around the house, repairing spouting and things like that, so it's entirely possible they could have been from whatever handyman jobs he'd been doing, so who knows.
And indeed, in a video exclusive, I am about to reveal to the world that I too have parallel score marks on my thumb at this point in time. I don't know whether it's going to come into focus because the cameras are turned off on my end.
And also, you're kind of holding it a bit too low. Oh, wait. Yeah, almost. Kind of. I can verify that there are marks on Matthew's thumb. He clearly was the killer all along.
It's true.
The police. Okay, but enough about...
And now I can explain those score marks. I can explain them very easily, but I'm not going to at this point in time.
Good. But enough about the Bain case. As I say, we could go on and on and on and on forever. There have been books made, and now there's been a recent podcast. So if you're interested, give it a listen. And if you're not, go on about your life.
Yeah.
So what next? Oh, speaking of stories that just won't go away, the Seth Rich conspiracy theories, which
has suddenly got very interesting. So Rod Wheeler, the Fox News contributor who was quoted in the now discredited story, which basically linked the Seth Rich story to the DNC hack, the WikiLeaks, and the idea that Seth Rich might have been the source of the email hack, has filed a lawsuit against Fox News.
Yep, he's filed a lawsuit against the network, its parent company, and a prominent Republican donor by the name of Ed Butowski, who offered to pay him to investigate Rich's murder. So his suit alleges that the reporter in the discredited story who quoted him fabricated quotes. Things got very interesting, where he claimed that President Trump himself had read a draft of the Seth Rich story, and had signed off on it, and talks about the fact that that this Mr. Butowski arranged a meeting between Rod Wheeler and Sean Spicer at the time when he was still the press secretary, I believe, to talk about all this, and included the text message which reads, "Not to add any more pressure, but the president just read the article. He wanted the article out immediately. It's all up to you, but don't feel the pressure. Don't feel the pressure." Butowski has since said, "Oh, that was just a joke. He didn't mean the president actually said it. He just sort of meant things are in motion and so on and so forth." So yeah, I mean, just if you weren't listening when we talked about it before, it's a case that's been around a while. This man Seth Rich died over a year ago now in Washington. He's a former DNC staffer. His death at the time was ruled as the result of a robbery gone wrong, and the police have not changed their mind about that. But conspiracy theories started swirling that he was killed because he was actually the person who leaked the DNC emails, which would be very convenient because it would prove that Russia had nothing to do with it. But as we're seeing, the case against him, and if you may recall, Fox News ran this story. They eventually pulled it, although Sean Hannity continued to bang the drum, and eventually dropped it, I believe, after being petitioned directly by Seth Rich's family. And so yes, now we're seeing some background into how the story came about, and it's beginning to look dodgier than ever, I guess.
And what's particularly interesting about this is that Seth Rich's family have released a statement supporting the lawsuit.
Which I guess makes sense. The lawsuit claims that the story was bogus, although I believe this Wheeler is not 100% trustworthy in the things he's said and done in the past as well. So some people are claiming.
Well, let me
false,
point out he was a
claims.
Fox News contributor, and Fox News does not necessarily have the best reputation for quality journalism.
Well, I didn't want to say it, but there you go. Yes, so interesting wrinkle there. Also now, tell me about Kim.com.
Must I? So Kim.com, as long-term listeners of the show will be aware of, is a German national and now New Zealand permanent resident. In fact, actually might even be a citizen by now, who was the head of Mega Upload, which was brought down by Hollywood and the American government because of its hosting of pirated materials. Because Kim.com was a permanent resident in New Zealand at the time, the American government needed to get information about Kim.com. They asked our local spy agency, the GCSB, to spy on Kim.com, which they did, which turned out to be illegal because the GCSB is not allowed to spy on permanent residents. They're considered to be citizens of the country for the purposes of domestic surveillance, and thus, as he wasn't a foreign national, they shouldn't have spied upon him. Kim.com is now fighting his extradition to the US. In fact, actually, I think he's fought his extradition and lost, but has appealed that loss in our court system. And part of the story as to why he was aggrieved was the fact that he should never have been spied upon in the first place. Now, when it came out the GCSB had spied on Kim.com, they went, "Oh, we were misinformed about his residency status." And once we were aware that he was a permanent resident after the raids had occurred, we stopped the spying. Now it turns out that that wasn't true. The GCSB spied on Kim.com for at least a month more after they were told he wasn't meant to be spied upon. They are claiming the only reason why they continued to spy upon him was because there were systems in place they had no control over, so they couldn't stop the spying. That's led to a raft of conspiracy theories as to, so if the GCSB couldn't control the mechanisms under which they had Kim.com under surveillance, who's actually in control of our domestic spying operation? Is it in fact the NSA? And B, it's brung in the current Prime Minister, Bill English, because Bill English was the person who had to sign off on these activities at the time. And Bill English is now claiming he was unaware that the spying continued for a month after it was meant to have stopped.
So this has come out in between .com losing his initial case against extradition and the appeal, has it? So is it going to have any bearing on the appeal? Does it seem?
Well, it presumably will do, because .com will be able to point out that the government made assurances about spying which turned out to be false, and thus the government is basically in the wrong. And if they can then link the continued spying to American interference, that surely is going to pose trouble for the extradition of Kim.com to the US for charges on piracy.
Oh well, I'd just like to point out that at the moment, the way the sun has shifted there in Romania, you have sort of a shaft of sunlight going across you that looks not unlike the Captain Kirk eyes he used to get on Star Trek. If you see that a little, it's nicely sort of framed there. Our podcast listeners won't know that, but that'll be an added bonus if you happen to be watching this on our YouTube channel.
How very exciting.
Anyway, so we've talked a little bit, I think it was last time, we talked about the idea of vote tampering and thought maybe we should do a whole episode on conspiracies around this sort of vote tampering and voter fraud and so on, and maybe we will. But right now, I see another example of this has popped up in Venezuela.
Yes, so Venezuela went to the polls either late last week or early this week, and Nicolas Maduro and his party were voted back in. And now there's a they said battle going on as to whether there was any vote tampering. So an American company by the name of Smartmatic provided about 24,000 voting machines for Venezuelans to cast their votes electronically. And according to the company, their system supplied correct voting statistics, but altered results were announced in their place. Now, separately, Reuters has reported it had seen an internal memo from Venezuela's electoral authorities saying fewer than 4 million votes had been cast just 2 hours before polls closed. So the claim here is that the Venezuelan government has altered the vote to secure their continued presence and majority in the Venezuelan parliament. The Venezuelan government, of course, is claiming that none of this is true, with the insinuation that this is simply America trying to interfere with their elections once again, which is something America does have history with, interfering with the elections in Venezuela. And also, after the results were announced, the American government immediately said, we disagree with those results. So there's a kind of, maybe the report from Smartmatic is part of a disinformation campaign to bolster the opposition in Venezuela, or maybe vote tampering actually did occur.
Any chance we'll find out either way? Or is it just going to remain, unless there's some sort of leak, I suppose?
Yeah, herein lies the issue. So America is not trustworthy when it comes to interfering in elections in South America. I think we are at a point now where it's plausible to think that if an election occurs in South America, America will have done something with respect to it. At the same time, Nicolas Maduro's government doesn't seem necessarily like the kind of government that is committed to open and transparent democracy.
Oh well, I guess if something comes out it will, and if it doesn't, it doesn't.
But it does give us a
Seems
nice
like
launching point for a discussion about vote tampering and electoral fraud, maybe in the next episode.
That might be a good idea, actually. Right, well, we're out of news now, I think. So maybe,
the news
finally,
is gone.
at long last, you should spill the beans on what you've been up to in Germany. Should we talk about that?
After the chime, we'll talk about the cost network and Compact.
Right, well, I see we've got about 15-20 minutes, I guess, left to go. So in that amount of time, first of all, what were you doing in Germany? tell me that.
A better
young
question
man.
is, what wasn't I doing in Germany? Hey,
No, it's not. It's not a better question at all. It's much less specific and potentially less informative. What were you doing in Germany?
I was
Answer the
attending.
question.
All right. I will. You're pressuring me, but I'm going to answer the question. I was the Romanian representative of the cost action named Compact, which is a pan-European project looking at the study of conspiracy theories by European researchers on European conspiracy theories. Although that being said, the focus really is on conspiracy theories. Generally, the primary part of the network, and that's what we're called, we're a network, is to bring European researchers on conspiracy theories together several times a year so that we can network, that's that word again, and share our research in a network. It's a network, Joshua. I just want to point out a bunch of conspiracy theory theorists get together every few months in what is called a network. I mean, if you're going to talk about there being conspiracies in academia, the last thing you want to do is name your collaborative research system a network. It just sounds so ominous and so conspiratorial, but maybe that's the entire point.
Is it network with a capital N?
I prefer to think of it as network with a capital N. I suspect actually it's lowercase.
No, it's a shame. Well, if it's German, if you did it in Germany, at least it would have had a capital N because they capitalise all nouns in the German language.
Well, then
It's just a
presumably
thing about German.
in Tübingen, it was in fact a capital N network.
Well, excellent. So, was this being hosted by a university, or was it just a chosen meeting place?
So it was a chosen meeting place. So there are two chairs of the compact system, Peter Knight and Michael Butter. Michael Butter is at Tübingen, so the conference is being held at his host institution. According to Wikipedia, Tübingen is the most prestigious university in Germany. However, if you actually do a search for universities on Wikipedia, many universities in Germany in Wikipedia claim to be the most prestigious. It's a little bit like trying to look up walled cities in the UK. Every single city in the UK which has most of its wall left claims to be the only city in the UK with the largest standing wall. It just seems to be a point of contention. Everyone says my wall is the best. Everyone claims my university is the best as well.
Okay, so what was your role in the proceedings?
My role was twofold. One, I was there as the Romanian representative to make sure there was a quorum of countries in attendance to make sure that the meeting could go ahead. And B, my role was to listen to talks and provide constructive feedback. So this was one of those cases where I went to a conference where I actually wasn't giving a paper.
Now, actually, this is something I don't think I've asked before about your position there in Romania. Are there Romanian academics working alongside you in the same thing, or are you sort of filling a vacancy in terms of being the person who's doing this fellowship on conspiracy theories?
So there are other Romanian academics who are working on conspiracy theories. So there's someone in media studies looking at the role of dissemination of conspiracy theories in Romania. There's a forthcoming PhD student who is going to be looking at the way that conspiracy theories are portrayed in fiction. But I am basically working alone here at the University of Bucharest on my own particular project. I'm the lone actor and the Romanian lone actor. Actually, this led to a certain amount of confusion and delight in that my name tag had me down as the Romanian representative, and people kept on asking me how had I perfected my wonderful English accent.
And what did you reply?
That I spent a very, very, very long time growing up in New Zealand.
Right. Okay. So you didn't have people just coming up to you and launching into Romanian and you just having to smile and nod and pretend like you know what they're talking about? In some
Well, there was only
sort of
one
contrived
other
comedy
Romanian
scenario?
speaker there, so no.
Yeah, that's a shame. Okay, so tell me about the sorts of things that you saw and critiqued and gave feedback upon.
All right, so it was a 3-day conference. We had a combination of keynote speeches and people presenting their research. So keynotes, we had Joe Usinski from the University of Miami
Friend of
giving
the podcast.
indeed, giving a talk entitled Conspiracy Theories Are for Losers, which is basically the summation of his work in the book American Conspiracy Theories, where he claims that conspiracy theories are predominantly put out by people who have lost political power. So he admits that the conspiracy theories are for losers tag is designed to kind of incite the audience, but the whole point is it's not a pejorative label. It's simply that conspiracy theories are more likely to be disseminated by people who no longer have any political power. So Democrats are more likely to engage in conspiracy theorizing now that Trump is president, whilst Republicans were more likely to conspiracy theorize when Obama was president. We also had a talk from Tim Malley from Miami University, which turns out is not the same as the University of Miami. So the University of Miami is located in Florida, and Miami University is not located in the state of Florida at all. Very confusing. And Tim Malley was giving a discussion about the way that the term and labels that conspiracy theory are used and the way that it affects the kind of research we do. We also had Karen Douglas, who was giving a pre-say on the work on psychology with respect to conspiracy theories. So we had a range of very good keynotes giving us kind of up-to-date discussions on what's happening in particular branches of the literature. Now, aside from those keynotes, we also had a bunch of shorter reports where people were talking about their own particular research, which in some cases dovetails into discussion of conspiracy theories. So the Compact Network is made up of people who are explicitly studying conspiracy theories like myself, and other researchers who are doing work which dovetails with work on conspiracy theories. So, say, historians who happen to look at things which end up being conspiratorial, or people in media studies who are looking at the dissemination of information online and who have ideas and thoughts about how conspiracy theories may disseminate in a particular network. And so we had talks on the role of the dissemination of rumors and conspiracy theories online, for example, a very interesting discussion about Victorian invasion narratives, which were these serialized novels that appeared in newspapers at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, which posited potential invasion stories that were kind of written as gripping dramas a la War of the Worlds, and the way that these particular invasion narratives mirrored the fear of potential war in the Victorian age. And you find these in Britain, you find these in France, you find these in Italy, and often they have quite conspiratorial elements within it because they often start off with the notion that there are already double agents operating in your society. So we had a range of talks that went from the explicit discussion of the theory of conspiracy theory to examples of things which, when thought about in a particular way, have conspiratorial overtones.
So was this what was the format of them? Would you sort of directly speak to the person after they gave their piece and have a conversation about it, or was it the sort of thing where you're taking notes and it'll form be involved in various papers that the attendees will be writing in the future?
So basically, most of the panels, this did change from panel to panel, would be 3 people give a 15 to 20 minute presentation, and then there'd be a half hour of questions afterwards. So you basically put up your hand, wait in line, and then direct your question to the person you wanted your question to be directed to. And so in some cases, that meant that you would give them direct feedback in question time. In other cases, that meant you'd go and talk to them in one of the many coffee breaks and discuss things with them quite explicitly there. Or if you were lucky, you might even go out for drinks or dinner with them and have a quite robust discussion about what's going on in their particular field or what's going on in your particular field.
Actually, I should have asked at the start, how many people were there? How many would be in attendance for these various panels?
So I think there were around about 80 people in attendance in this particular meeting. I think at the moment Compact has about 144 members overall, and about 80 were in attendance this time. The next meeting is going to be in Lisbon. I will not be able to attend that one because I will be temporarily back in New Zealand at that particular point in time. But the meeting after that is going to be at the Hotel Bilderberg. And the Hotel Bilderberg is, yes, it's conspiracy theory central, as I suggested
Couldn't really
to Peter
pass up
Knight.
that, could you?
No, and as I suggested to Peter Knight, they also need to hold at least one meeting in Ingolstadt, where, of course, the Illuminati were given birth to, and also promptly died.
Wow. Yes.
Allegedly.
So what did you take out of it? Is it going to be influencing your work, the things you heard over those 3 days?
Yes. I mean, there was a lot of information there which I've kind of added to my notes and archive, some of which are simply, that's a really nice example, I should try and use that in my own work. Other bits and pieces are notes I've put down for a potential revision to the book. So if the book ever goes into a second edition, I've got a whole bunch of notes of A, things the book doesn't cover, which it probably should, and B, updates to the book based upon more current research. And this is what's really useful about conferences like this. It allows you to see what the cutting edge of research is in your particular field and other fields, and thus allows you to start arming yourself for potential responses when papers get published.
How were philosophy departments represented?
Not particularly widely. So the Compact has people from sociology, political studies, media studies, medicine, philosophy, culture studies, psychology, social psychology, and the like. There weren't many philosophers in attendance at this particular meeting. In fact, most of the talks were of a quantitative rather than qualitative form. So it was a lot of correlational studies as opposed to direct theoretical considerations. But that, of course, will change depending on A, the makeup of the attendees, and B, the panels that are offered at each particular conference.
Well, it's approaching time to wrap all this up. Are there any last thoughts you'd like to share about your experience? Tübingen
is a lovely place to visit. So if you ever get a chance to visit that part of Germany, I would recommend visiting the Old Town. It is the quintessential German experience. Windy streets, a castle in the middle, a clock tower you can climb up to see the sights. What I did find fascinating, and this is not at all conspiratorial, unless of course you want to make it conspiratorial, there were an awful lot of vegans in the network. An awful lot of vegans. Also, this is one of the few conferences I've been to where the vegan catering was actually really good. So, is there a conspiracy by strict vegetarians to infiltrate academic networks concerning conspiracy theories to wrest control from the carnivores and instill some kind of vegetarian New World Order? I think there might be.
Almost certainly, I think, yeah.
In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm part of that conspiracy.
Well, you'd basically have to be at this point, wouldn't you?
I would, and I am, and I shall be, for all time.
Right, well, in that case, perhaps it would be a good idea to say you have been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Okay, you've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
So my name's Josh Edison. As I
it
said
is.
At the start,
I can verify that. I've seen his passport.
And I don't know if I have seen your passport, but if I did, I'm fairly certain it would say
Surely
something along the lines...
Surely you've seen my revised birth certificate at some stage.
I don't know. I always just took your word for it, to be honest. You could have
Really?
been lying through your teeth this entire time, but why would you lie about something like that?
It's true. Why would I lie that my name is Matthew Richard Xavier Xantos Xanthos Xanthos Xantos X Dracos Romulus Oliphant Ransom Dentith? Why would I lie about that?
Is all of that on your passport?
Yes, not on the front page. It doesn't quite fit on the front page, but there is a second page devoted to my full name.
Excellent. So, at any rate, regardless of what it appears in the official documents, we know him as Dr. Matthew R. X. Dentith. Currently in Romania. Before that, sauntering around Germany. Before that, holidaying in Italy. Before that, back in Romania. Before that, in New Zealand. I could keep going, but I won't. Soon to be back in New Zealand, which will be exciting, yes.
Yes, we'll be recording these podcasts face-to-face again. Oh, the fisticuffs that we will have.
We will. Completely unrelated to conspiracy theories so far, but what do you make of the fact that the New Zealand Labour Party, currently the main opposition party, has just ditched its leader, a month and a half out from the election, for Jacinda Ardern, the first female leader of the party since Helen Clark back in the...
Yeah, I have to say I am completely nonplussed about the change in leadership, because unless Labour actually moves towards the left, this seems like replacing one bad leader with an untested leader. And I'm in slight agreement with some of the political commentators who go, look, Jacinda Ardern seems like a really nice person, but as an opposition MP, she has not been startling. There are no policy platforms that she's championed through the House which have her name. She has never been a good debater in the House. She's never scored a hit upon any minister. At this stage, there's excitement in New Zealand about there being a new leader of the Labour Party, but I'm not convinced that she's actually any indication the Labour Party is going to change. In fact, actually, it's quite disturbing. She's gone from describing herself as being a social democrat to now being a pragmatic idealist. And I don't know what a pragmatic idealist is. Whilst I do know what a social democrat is. So at this stage, I'm completely nonplussed about the change in leadership.
We'll see. The only thing I have noticed straight away is that the media actually seems to really like her, whereas all the previous Labour leaders up until now could never really seem to catch a break, it would seem.
Very boring white men. And in that respect, it's refreshing to have someone who was relatively young. I mean, relatively young, I think she's 37.
37, yeah.
But, yeah, at this stage, I want to see some policy platforms, and I want to see Labour actually resembling a left-wing party once again, because the centre-left to almost centrist party it's become in recent years does not inspire me to vote for them. But then again, I am going to be voting Green in this election, so that's that.
You would not in any case describe yourself as centre-left anyway, I suppose.
No, I'm a communist.
Would have been good for you. Anyway, enough local politics. That's not what we're here to talk about.
We were in the process of saying goodbye.
We were, yeah. I just thought I'd just chuck a little colour in at the end there, just to keep people's flagging spirits up. I don't know.
Oh, and what did you think about the naughty word being said in Game of Thrones this week?
Well, it's not like it's the first time. If it's the naughty word delivered by Diana Rigg.
Yeah, I was so delighted. Delighted.
Yeah. It's not the first time that word has shown up, but yes, it was quite a delight to hear it come from the mouth of, is she Lady Diana Rigg? Dame Diana Rigg. Yes.
Yeah. And she said it with such gusto, such lovely gusto.
I do love me a good bit of profanity.
It's almost as if her entire acting career was building up to that one moment.
Yep.
Millions of people around the world are going to hear me say this word. My life is complete.
Mm-hmm. Right, well, I guess we should say goodbye then. I suppose, but before we do, perhaps if you want to get in touch with us, you can contact me on Twitter, where my name is Monkey Fluids. You can get in touch with Matthew, where his name is Conspiracism. There's a few more details along the lines of email addresses and so on that'll play automatically at the end. But you can you can find us on podbean.com, which is where we're hosted, conspiracism.podbean.com, but we're on iTunes. I believe we're now on Stitcher as well.
Yes, and the reason why I brought up Dame Diana Rigg is that we are on Stitcher, But if you go to Stitcher and look at the podcast feed, our most recent episode prior to this episode does not appear on the list. And I think that might be because the title of the episode is one that Josh chose and I chose not to redact.
Yes, it involves fairly forthright profanity and a fairly clear indication of my opinions on discussing Trump-related issues. But yes, as I think I said at the time, I put the title there. I didn't expect Matthew to use it, but once again, he confounds our expectations. International man of mystery that he is.
It's true. It's true.
So I think we've done that. We've done the iTunes. We've done the Stitcher. We've done the Twitter. Yeah, I reckon that'll do for now. So until next week, probably. You're not planning on jetting away to any other
not at this stage.
Cities?
Next week, I think we should engage in some election tampering and electoral fraud. I think we should.
Actually, what we possibly also should do is some sort of a countdown. It must be a matter of weeks now until you're back here.
Right. So I leave Romania on September the 11th. And then return back to Aotearoa, New Zealand on September the 16th. And that's not due to a bad choice of flights. That's due to the fact that I leave Romania on the 11th and go to the UK. Do not want to go through the US on the 11th of September because that just sounds
doesn't seem like a good idea.
Yeah.
No.
So I shall spend a few days in the UK catching up with friends and then saunter back to New Zealand to what will probably be about 14 degrees in September. So I'll go from high 20s to mid-teens, and it'll be the first time I've felt cold for a while.
Oh, well, there you go. Something in the region of 6 weeks until we see you back here again. Let's start the clock.
It's the final countdown.
Well, it's a countdown. Presumably there'll be others. I don't know. Will your arrival back in New Zealand herald some sort of dark times and the destruction of all we hold dear?
It will herald the end of time itself.
Oh, excellent. We can look forward to that then. Oh, well, until that happens, I guess, from the podcasters go... Oh, no, the song, of course. We're going to go out on a song, and I haven't said what it is.
This is the longest outro I think we've ever done. It just keeps on being derailed.
I think I started with the okay, time to wrap things up too soon. Normally we sort of ramble for a bit and then wrap up, and I started the wrapping up before we'd done the proper rambling, so they've sort of become intermingled. But no, the song we've chosen today is called Through the Noise, and it's by a group called Germany, Germany, for reasons that I would hope would be obvious by now.
Indeed. You mean the name of the song or the choice of the song?
The fact that I chose a song whose title, or in this case whose artist, bears some vague relation to the topic of today's episode.
Good.
Okay, I think we're done rambling and we're done wrapping up. So
yes. So basically
goodbye.
We should just play the song now.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Matthew R.X. Dentith, and produced by Matthew R.X. Dentith. If you've enjoyed the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, why not contribute to our Patreon or Podbean patron page? And you can contact us on podcastconspiracy@gmail.com. That's podcastconspiracy@gmail.com.